Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, folks. How are you doing? I hope you are doing well because I am, and I've got my tea right next to me, so I'm doing even better. And I want to thank you for listening and being with us today on the Danny Tisdale Show. And, of course, I'm Danny Tisdale, and we are, as we're always ready to do, and as to speak to some of the leaders, legends, and trailblazers in the world of Harlem. And I know you're probably getting tired of it, but I'm going to pat myself and our Harlem World team on the back one more time because it's still only April. But I want to let you know that we received the Alignables' first West Harlem Business of the Year Award for 2018/2019. Got a great team. They do great things. We've been doing it for 15 years, and we're looking forward to the next 15. And you can stay connected with us on Twitter, on Facebook, or go to our website, harlemworldmagazine.com, and just about any platform and put in Harlem World Magazine in your search engine. And as I mentioned earlier, we love, did I say love? Leaders, legends, and trailblazers in Harlem. And today we have Reverend Reggie Backus on the show today, and I hope I didn't destroy his name again. But before I speak to him directly, let me tell you a little bit about some of the work that he's done. Reverend Backus and Fortune Foundation were instrumental in getting the prevailing wage legislation out of the state budget by quietly engaging the Black Caucus and African American elected officials. The associate pastor at the historic Abyssinian Church, Reverend Backus, was recruited to Abyssinian for leadership transition plan to, at the request of Abyssinian senior pastor, Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts III, to advance the church's 210-year mission of advancing causes for positive social change, which you know Harlem World is all about with our Harlem World Cares. In September 2015, Reverend Backus was also named CEO of the Abyssinian Development Corporation, ADC, which in its 30-year history has invested, sit down, get your pen out, $1 billion into the Harlem community through real estate, economic, and programmatic development. Backus brought the company into the black before moving into the full-time duties as associate pastor and enrolling in law school at Hofstra. Reverend Backus, thank you for being with us, and how are you doing?
I'm wonderful, Brother Tisdale. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your work in activism and making a difference from the West Coast to the East Coast, and certainly join the voices celebrating you and the Harlem World team on this 15 years, and we're excited to see what the next 15 will bring.
Well, brother, now I know why. We almost don't have to do the interview because with what you just said, we know why you've been moved up the ladder to the positions you've been moved in, and thoughtful and focused, and that always goes over well. And thank you for the kind words. And before we get started, I want to thank you back for doing the work that you're doing in ADC. And I did not know that $1 billion had been invested in the Harlem community in the way that you have. And, you could work, Reverend Backus, in corporate America or have your own business. What inspired you to do the work that you're doing in the church and in Harlem?
Yeah. So, I am in the unique position of being blessed to have divine inspiration. I think a lot of people have inspiration. One has been divine inspiration. I'm a third-generation Baptist pastor, so it's been in the family, they call it the family business, I guess. I don't want to make a negative sense of it, but I actually ran from preaching and answering my call to ministry for many years until I just couldn't run anymore. So when the call came, I had to heed the voice of God calling me to this, and I've always been focused on a ministry that is not just focused within the four walls of the church, but then also has impact in the community. So this is just kind of the natural progression of, who I am, what I believe, my theological lens by which I view the Bible and the work of Jesus Christ, engaging not just the spiritual, but then also the secular, being a revolutionary, a disruptor, one who is bringing about justice in the present day and time.
I've heard of those stories. I love Japanese history, and what you just mentioned is something that I hear all the time, or should I say, we hear all the time or read about, because I love Japanese heritage businesses that have been around for, I read one the other day that was around for 1,000 years, and the guy was saying, he almost said what you said. I didn't want to do the business. I wanted to do my own thing. What were some of the things that you wanted to do before the clouds parted and the sun shined? Were you going to start your own business or in the music industry? What were your interests? They probably still are, but what were your interests at the time?
Well, I believe I first felt a call to the gospel around the age of 13, resisted until the age of 20. My plan at the time, I was a junior, majoring in electrical engineering at Prairie View A&M University in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
But, my goal, even while I was in Prairie View as a kid, has always been entrepreneurial minded. So I've always had businesses, started businesses, being believed in being self-sufficient, never wanted to be a burden to my parents or to my family. Right. So my goal, I think I always knew I would end up in ministry, but my goal was to start a business and maybe start a church fund, didn't have to be paid by the church, so that the money that the members, invested in the ministry could just be used to impact the community and the lives of the members who, put in, their time and their resources, to make sure that the mission of Christ and mission of justice was advanced. So my goal, again, was to start a business. I didn't know what kind of business. I've had website, media marketing, graphic design. Growing up, I always wanted to be a basketball player and such. But somewhere in business, didn't know exactly where, but knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but made money, but also made a difference. Right.
And so with that, I'm using my sports analogy here. So playing a little basketball, you must be competitive. And that competition and that competitive streak obviously is what you bring with you now, and you do it, of course, in a very positive, supportive way. And, part of what I read in the intro is the issue of prevailing wage legislation. Can you talk a little bit about that, and why was the partnership with the 400 Foundation important?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the backdrop for this, to put it in its kind of political context, looking at the opportunity, first time in 40 years, we have a Democratic majority in the Senate and the Assembly. We have three African Americans very sensitive to the African American experience in New York State and America at large in leadership positions. So that was kind of the political backdrop. The social and also legislative backdrop. I was in my home one day. The Lord just dropped it on my heart. What happens if recreational marijuana passes, which necessarily means they have to decriminalize marijuana? So you have to release the young men and women who are in Rikers, those who are in upstate New York because of the Rockefeller drug laws, and they're coming back to communities where there's a lack of access and opportunity to education and economic outlets. So I thought it just became imperative that the churches come together to avert another crisis that we saw in urban communities across the country in the 80s and 90s in the crack epidemic. And what I just envision is we don't set something in place to ensure that men and women coming home and those who are already in our neighborhoods have jobs and have viable means to support themselves and their families and have a decent quality of life. I was just very concerned about what the outcome would be. So we organized churches, saying, how do we get young men and women in construction? The reason we like construction is because it's one of the only blue-collar jobs where you can have a high school diploma and a criminal record and make between $70, $80, $90, up to $150,000 per year through construction and the construction trades. So
very good point.
That obviously pointed us to look at legislation that would disrupt any type of pipeline that we tried to put in place. We're very much trying to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. So you have to create a school to viable job pipeline, a school to entrepreneurship pipeline, school to ownership. And prevailing wage, when you look at the heart of it, it really dates back to 1931. You got to remember America in 1931, you had the migration happening as they were fleeing domestic terrorism in the South, Jim Crow, lynching. You had black men migrating to the North. And for the same reasons, one of the economic opportunities for these migrating men was in the construction industry. And Davis and Bacon is called the Davis-Bacon Act. They were congressmen from New York and Pennsylvania who heard the constituents of their districts saying that too many black men are taking white men's jobs. So they started the Davis-Bacon Act saying that any public project that receives public funding, is on public land, is for public use or public building, has to be built 100% union. Now, the unions were set up originally to be exclusionary to African Americans. So that's kind of the backdrop. Now, the new legislation is trying to change the definition of public works. And again, the existing definition of public works are public schools, state office buildings on public land, for public purposes. Now, the expansion of that definition raises the point that if a project receives a public subsidy, so reduced interest and financing, any type of capital infusion, or a tax abatement where you pay lower taxes or no taxes for a period of time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that now would qualify as a public works. And the challenge, with that is if you extend the definition of public works now to private projects, that means that now private projects will have to go 100% union. And our studies and ethnography and just, reading suggest that 75% of open shops, so when it comes to construction laborers, you have those who are in the unions, and you have those who are non-union or what's called open shop. 75% of that open shop category is made of minorities and women. So the question we raise is what happens to them without a definitive plan to ensure that they will be transitioned into the unions? How can we allow the displacement of potentially 75,000, minorities and women who, because of pre-existing conditions and a lack of access to opportunities, may have no other viable means to supply for themselves, to supply resources for themselves and their families. So that's one of kind of the major issues directly tied to another big issue. Yeah, another big issue was affordable housing. So it was estimated that $7.1 billion would be the cost of extending prevailing wage to these new classed private projects. That translates into 74,000 units of affordable housing vulnerable or lost. And in our opinion, that's the nail in the coffin with gentrification. We talk about taking away 74,000. The average household is 3 people. That's over 200,000 people who now will not have opportunity in the midst of one of the greatest housing crises facing the city of New York. We talk about the shortage of available housing for seniors, for supportive housing, for all these opportunities now lumped in and necessarily have to pay prevailing wage. And the cost on these projects goes up 30%, which gets to the second point, and I'll be quick. It affects MBEs, minority businesses. Now, one of the greatest challenges facing minority businesses right now is that you have to have the capital on your books and in your balance sheet. A lot of the public projects fund on a reimbursement system. So you can be waiting for a check anywhere between 90 and 120 days, right? Most businesses don't have those type of capital
don't
reserves.
Have that kind of money sitting in reserve. Right.
Yeah. So now you need 30% more money in reserve. The other issue is bonding, insurance. Now the cost goes up by 30%. You need 30% more capital to pay for the bonding and the insurance that is mandatory to even bid for the projects, let alone win the projects. So, those are 3 of the major points. There's a lot of other points, but those are of great concern for us here in the 400th year of slavery in North America, 1619 to 2019. And, what we said, we're able to galvanize, clergy and other interested stakeholders saying we need definitive language to ensure that open shop workers' lives are not disrupted, that MBEs have carve-out set-asides or some type of consideration to ensure that they're not pushed further out from bidding, let alone winning contracts. And then obviously affordable housing, which affects many of the houses of worship across the city and the state.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I like and what you haven't mentioned is this could be the dare I say the first quarter of a 4-quarter game that is a national game, because if not, unless I'm hearing something different, these are the same issues that are happening nationally that we're talking about happening locally in Harlem, in New York City.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's more troubling in the New York City context with all this money here, over 2 million African Americans. When you add our Latino brothers and sisters, minorities make up the majority of the population, but yet we are still a very small fraction, crumbs, I would dare to say, of this $100 billion real estate construction and development industry. And, there are some organizations out there. We want to join them in what they're doing to add voices to the concert of concern. That unless we have participation in this viable industry, construction, development is a permanent industry, permanent market. People will always need a place to live. Houses of worship, organizations will always need a place to call home, to gather people together. So it's just too essential of an industry for us to continue to be excluded. And it does apply, nationally when you look at places, Chicago, Los Angeles, where everybody needs housing, but we don't have enough people creating that housing. And people who create it from the community are sensitive to community needs.
Well, and what's astonishing is that, I'm bouncing back and forth because of family illness to the West Coast. And I was born and raised here, but let me just say that Los Angeles is nowhere close to where New York City is. And they may need more than just a Reverend Bacchus in New York. They might need about 10 or 11 of you out here. So are we kind of I'm going to use another basketball analogy since you mentioned basketball, and it's one of my favorite sports. Are we in the first quarter also of this legislation?
We are. So the way the legislative
are we in the first? We're in the first half of the game. I'm sorry, in the first half of that quarter, right?
I would definitely say yes. The way the legislative process works in New York, they actually are in session from January to June. Really, the first calendar quarter, has completed. And what happens is March 31st, April 1st is the deadline for the budget. And if it would have been in the budget, it would have been a done deal. So we were able to get it out. So I think it is the first quarter or first half, depending on how you lose. Maybe we're talking about high school, college basketball, right? So it's a first half. But the next battle will be, there's a lot of interest to see prevailing wage go through, a lot of, stakeholders, people involved. And it's trying to figure out how do we get people around the table to ensure that if the legislation goes through between now and the end of June, that it addresses those issues that we have raised and voices, again, across the state have raised. So now the fight is just to let people know, educational campaign. One of the things we've been asking for is a public hearing or a fact-finding commission to ensure that any type of legislation that goes through in this progressive environment, it's not enough just to say you're progressive, but your policies are regressive, right? They put us back to where we were. So I think that it is a fight right now. We certainly are on the radar of elected officials, but then also stakeholders. And the great tragedy in this oftentimes is that the communities that are impacted and affected are left out of the conversation. So we're trying to organize and mobilize those communities. As the expression goes, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we're trying to ensure that we're not on the menu by getting a seat at the table. Yes. So we are very much in the
Reverend
fight.
Bacchus, I just want to give a real quick station ID, and I know folks out there who are looking at their clocks, we're 5 minutes over, but I know you love it, so I know you'll be patient. And you're listening to Harlem World Radio, and it's Danny Tisdale on the Danny Tisdale Show, and we're talking about something that affects everyone who's probably listening right now, and those who aren't listening. And we're speaking to Reverend Reginald Backus from Abyssinia Development Corporation. And Reverend, can you tell us a little bit about the 400 Foundation? I don't think I did a good job of kind of talking about some of the work that you do. And we have 10 minutes left, and I got about 10,000 questions left for you. So just giving you a heads up.
All right, so I'll take the short train. 400 Foundation, in commemoration of the 400th anniversary of slavery in North America. First slave ship landed in Jamestown, Virginia, 1619. Here we are 400 years later in 2019. Also, the biblical precedent, Genesis 15:13, God told Abram that your children will be oppressed for 400 years. But then in 400 years, God will send a deliverer to take them to the promised land. So that's the historical backdrop of the 400 Foundation. African-American churches have always latched on to the Exodus narrative and story when you think about the history of slavery. So that's kind of the backdrop. But our work, again, is in real estate development and construction, just kind of fighting for economic justice and ensuring that we have access and opportunities, and really trying to work to take down the barriers that have kept us out of this vital and valuable industry.
I love the work that you're doing, whether you would be in Harlem or Hollywood or Harare. You know, it's really, and I don't say this lightly, it's really God's work. And I'm going to dwindle my questions down to these last two or three. Abyssinia is looking at 210-year mission of advancing causes for positive change. Can you give me a tease on a few of the, not so much the projects, I guess, but how that positive change is taking place? And I guess it is some of the projects. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this year Abyssinia will actually be celebrating our 211th anniversary, founded in 1808.
Okay.
The Abyssinia Development Corporation, I think, is one of the most visible impacts, facilitators of impact in Harlem, and again, investing that $1 billion, million square feet of development. The Harlem that we know today would not be what it is without the work of Reverend Dr. Calvin O'Butts, the Abyssinia Development Corporation, and its leadership regimes through the years, over the last 30 years, really investing. We think about the huge divestment, the lack of investment that was in Harlem, the redlining. ADC helped jumpstart the process, and it was important for a non-for-profit to do it, because non-for-profits are not driven by the same for-profit motives of a lot of the larger corporations who are now coming in because Harlem is now attractive. But we got to keep in mind, Malcolm X in the 60s said that people were coming to Harlem. It's the only place 125th runs across the entire island. You have access to Westchester County, the Bronx, Queens, everything, northern New Jersey. So it's a very vital area. You can hop on the A train 7 minutes, you're in Midtown. So what we are trying to do is continually push for entrepreneurship and ownership of our homes. We think the only way you stem the tide of gentrification is by indigenous home ownership, and setting up systems and ways, advocating to ensure the people who have been faithful during the downtime of Harlem are not displaced during the uptime of Uptown. So that's one of the social things. Abyssinian has also been always been a venue for a celebration of the culture, the arts, just a open space to have conversations that a lot of other people weren't having, or that are not traditional conversations in a church context. So we continue to hope to be at the vanguard of social change, education, activism, awareness. The tenure and work of Dr. Butt speaks for itself. And those other things that we're working on, really again on the the housing front and ownership front, really trying to help organize churches in the midst of a time when churches are asset rich but cash poor. We see a lot of developers coming in giving bad deals to churches, trying to tell churches you need to do a land lease as opposed to selling your property, because once the land is gone, you never get it back.
Done. Right. And you are on point and loving it. And I wanted to get into kind of the business side, and I just want to warn you, we've got 4 minutes left. So, and I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 questions. And something I read in the information sent over was that you brought the company into the black. What are some of the tips that you could give, maybe 1 or 2 or 3, for business owners out there listening in on, kind of following in your footsteps? The thing, how do you get your company to stay in the black and out of the red?
Well, I'll give you 3 quick bullet points. People make the difference. People make the difference. As you invest in people, time, energy, you got to spend time with them. People work for you. You got to develop a relationship so they trust you, which leads to the second bullet point, is transparency. We live in a day and age of transparency where everything's accessible. So I was just able to communicate our challenges with the people, garnered their trust and support to work with us and with us. The third thing is you got to make tough decisions. Everything that you have done is not everything that you need to do going forward, and really focusing on a balanced budget. Never spend more than you bring in, and that takes some innovation, austerity, but just really being focused, knowing your numbers, understanding the context that they're in. I think that's a key point. You mentioned discipline as well, having discipline and focus within the organization.
That's good stuff. And we've got, they're telling me 3 minutes. So 2 things, your favorite place in Harlem, and it can't be the church. And the second question I have, contact information so our listeners can stay abreast of what's happening with the work that you're doing at the church and the 400 Foundation. But your favorite place in Harlem, just one if possible.
One, I'm an old school traditionalist, so I think Sylvia's has been a bedrock in Harlem, so still enjoy going there for breakfast.
Brother, you just made my stomach growl. I don't know if you heard it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's been an institution. We need to continue to support it and make sure that it stays viable and present in the Harlem community. So I would say Sylvia's. Most
definitely. And website, social media, where our listeners can stay in touch with what's going on and what you're doing and the 400 Foundation?
Absolutely. The website is weare400.com. We are the 400.com. We are more active on social media, and our handle is at 400 Foundation, the number 400 Foundation, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to stay abreast of the work that we're doing.
Fantastic. And we've got, believe it or not, a minute left. And I wanted to ask you, what position did you play when you played basketball?
I actually played all 4 positions. I could jump pretty high. In Kansas, I didn't have a whole lot of tall teammates, but I think I was best at a 2 or a 3.
And so 2 or 3. So what are we saying about the Knicks? Are they going all the way this year, or is it wait and see?
If we pick up Durant and Kyrie, I think anything is possible. Otherwise, it's maybe another miserable year.
No, I think those are very good points, and you've got some insight because you've got a connection with the big person upstairs. So hopefully that's given us some insight, because I hope that you're right. But more importantly, Reverend, I really love the work that you're doing, and you've got your team behind you, in front of you, next to you, that's helping you do some of the work that you're doing. And with us, we're at 40 seconds. Is there anything that business owners that are listening and others that are listening can do to help the 400 Foundation, to help the work that you're doing at the Abyssinia Baptist Church? Is there anything that they can do? We've at the 30-second mark. I'm sorry.
Stay engaged, stay involved, stay connected. We'll be, posting about events and events that are happening. If you could come out, I want to thank Reverend Clinton Miller, Brown Memorial Baptist Church, and Kali Mutu, Emmanuel AME Church in Harlem, who are my co-founders.
And fantastic, and as I said, love the work that you're doing, and we've already went to the 400 Foundation and got on the newsletter. And please send us anything and everything you have where we can support the work that you're doing. And just love having you on the show, and I will reach back to you. Thank you again for being on the show, Reverend. Thank you.
Anytime, and thank you. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.